what I intend doing today is going to be a totally informal lecture. There's no structured talk. So I will try to introduce a case and then leave it to you to discuss it, and any queries, interaction or so I'll add on. And at any time you think we have crossed the time, you can stop because it's not a structured talk. Let's go on to the first case, a case of primary hypothyroidism. 58-year-old Kalavati, complaints of tiredness and difficulty in concentrating, decline in memory, frequent bowel movements, increased tendency to gain weight. She had cold intolerance. Her younger sister had hypothyroidism. Weight is 140 pounds. BP is normal. Puffy face, eyebrows sparse, thyroid firm vacillated, deep tendon jerks, relaxed. Total thyroid hormone, lower limit of normal, T4, T3 normal, TSH grossly elevated, antibodies are positive. So this is the typical scenario of a classic textbook description of hypothyroidism which you will see. Now, what issues do you think we should discuss? What is your opinion? What strikes you? What do you think we should do from here? Yeah, now if you see, now what you see here is a classical textbook pattern of hypothyroidism. You can see the clinical features, everything puffy face. Like the chairperson said, it's not always that you have such typical features. And here you can see T4 is on the lower side of normal, TSH is grossly elevated, you have positive thyroid antibodies. And the main thyroid antibodies are the ones against microsome or the peroxidase, TPO, antimicrosomal antibody, which is positive in about 80% of autoimmune thyroiditis. The thyroglobulin antibody positivity is there in about 35%. Again, you very rarely get to see such a typical case. And the signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism are very vague and non-specific. It could present just with fatigue, constipation, cold intolerance, muscle cramps, insomnia, weight gain, carpal tunnel syndrome, hair loss, voice changes, intellectual slowness, goiter, periorbital edema, dry skin, deep tendon jerks, prolonged. So you see very, very, very non-specific. So all these symptoms and signs would be there in a whole lot of conditions. So unless you have a very strong suspicion, you would not order for a thyroid function test. So case which I showed you was very specific, classical features, textbook description. But it's not always like that. And what we did with the patient is we started her on levothyroxine and resolution of symptoms within 2 months. Following up, the thyroid functions normalized. TSH changes slowly after T4, it's normalized. Up to a month required for TSH to come to normal. See, what is very important is, now again when you are starting therapy, you have to wait for changes to occur. Improvement will be seen in about 2 weeks, but it will take about 4 to 6 weeks for lab values to normalize. And there are 2 methods of going through this. You can start with the optimal dosage right in the beginning, or you could step up the dosage, start with a lower dosage and go up. Choice is yours. Finally, the clinical features improvement and improvement in signs symptoms more or less occur at the same time. But lab normalizes much early if the loading dose initially is the maximum dose which you want. Again, you have to wait for about 4 to 6 weeks before you repeat the lab test. So it's no question of starting therapy and then within about a week or 10 days trying to repeat it. So you have to warn the patient it's going to take time, clinical improvement is going to take time. Otherwise, within a few days he doesn't feel better, he is going to either stop therapy or go to some other doctor. Now coming to the basic physiology, thyroid gland produces two hormones, T4 and T3. T4 is the main hormone and that gets converted to T3, which is the active hormone. And most of it is bound. 99% of it is bound. A very small percentage is only free, and that free part is the one which is biologically active. The metabolically active is the free hormone, and as you can see the percentage is very low. For free T4 it's only 0.03%, for free T3 it's 0.3%. Now thyroid gland produces thyroid hormones and there is a feedback on the pituitary and mainly through T3, free T4, and depending upon the circulating levels, TSH is either suppressed or stimulated to secrete more. Most of the T3 in the body is produced from T4 conversion by an enzyme called deiodinase. A very small percentage, only about 10 to 15%, is secreted by the thyroid gland. And as long as the deiodinase activity is normal, automatically the body will convert and there is no need for you to replace T3. Replacing T4 itself is good enough. And what we use now is the levoisomer called LT4. Those days, Professor Asia will remember, the dextroisomer was used for weight loss. DT4 they were using for weight loss. And what they later found out was weight loss should be at the expense of losing fat. But what was happening when they were using thyroid hormone for weight loss, it was only the lean body mass, that is the muscle and bone, which was breaking down. So you are losing weight in a very unhealthy way. So in simple terms, thyroxine therapy is not used for weight loss, not used for obesity. The only indication for thyroxine replacement is hypothyroid. Reference ranges, each lab has their own references. Now as far as replacement is concerned, if you want to start the full replacement dose, approximately 1.6 microgram per kilogram per day. So if you take women, it will approximately work out to anywhere between 75 to 125 micrograms. If you take men, it will work out to approximately 125 to 200 microgram. That is what is required if you want full replacement dose. But more often than not, the gland is already partially functioning and some amount of thyroid hormone is being secreted. So you don't require the full replacement. You could always start with a lower dose and build up. So either you could start with a full replacement initially, or you could have a step-up dosage where you start with a lower dosage and every 3 to 4 weeks step up the dosage till you get optimum T4 and TSH level biochemical correction, say within 2 months. In elderly patients and those people whom you may suspect to have cardiac problems or those with cardiac problem, you should always start with a lower dose, that is 25 microgram, increase by 25 microgram per day, 2 to 3 months until TSH is normal. And as you know, the normal TSH is anywhere between 4 to 5. 4.5 is what you can take. Each lab have their own normals. It's approximately between 4 and 5 would be the upper limit. Subclinical hypothyroidism, which we'll discuss later, is a form of hypothyroidism where T4 or free T4 levels are normal, TSH alone is elevated. It is a milder form of hypothyroidism, and in that you can start at a lower dose, 50 to 70% of the predicted full replacement dosage. And the target level which you have to reach is TSH 0.5 to 2, like I told you, in the middle level. Now, if you are going to use thyroxine for replacement, this is what you should reach, keeping the upper limit of normal as 4, 0.5 to 2 is what you should reach. This is for replacement. On the other hand, if you are using thyroxine for suppression therapy, for example, thyroid cancer, operated replacement, you want total suppression of TSH, because even if there is some amount of TSH circulating, this could stimulate any residual thyroid tissue or any malignant focus which is persisting and aggravated. So in those cases, for suppression, you should bring it to below normal, say 0.1 or so. The normal levels of TSH, as you know, is from 0.3 to 4.5 or 5. So if it's for replacement, like in this patient, primary hypothyroidism, keep it in the normal range of 0.5 to 2. If you are using for suppression, replacement, say after thyroid cancer surgery, then you have to make sure that you go below normal and keep it around 0.1. The maximum dose the patient can tolerate without developing any palpitation or tremors. Postpartum thyroiditis is a condition where you have a transient hypothyroidism. So that is one condition. What happens is, during pregnancy, HCG is an immunosuppressive agent. So it decreases the immunological activity, and postpartum there is a sudden spurt of thyroid antibodies release in those with an antibody titer or those with an autoimmune thyroiditis. So this could precipitate a postpartum thyroiditis. Initially it can be an inflammatory lesion with excess circulating thyroid hormone. Later on it may go into a hypothyroid phase. But usually within a year it settles down and you could stop thyroxine. There are very, very few conditions like postpartum thyroiditis where you could use therapy for a short time. In most cases, it's lifelong therapy, because what happens is there is destruction of the gland, and destruction is irreversible. And we are not giving thyroxine to either stimulate the gland or to make it function. What we are doing is only replacing it. And as time goes on, if the autoimmune activity persists, there will be further destruction and the dosage will have to be increased. Dosage increment occurs. This is where you have to always warn the patient, because he'll come first where you have given him 75 microgram, next visit will be 100, then 125. He'll be worried, concerned. He'll say, I'm taking the medicine correctly, properly. Why does this happen? What you have to tell him is, I cannot cure your hypothyroidism. I'm not giving you drugs to make it work. I'm not giving you medicine to correct your thyroid dysfunction. I'm only replacing, and depending on the autoimmune activity and further destruction, the dosage can increase. T4 treatment reverses all clinical manifestation of hypothyroidism. So all the clinical manifestations you said will go off. It will approximately take 2 months for all this to reverse. Synthetic T4, 80% is absorbed, always on an empty stomach with water, and half an hour to 1 hour later, you can have coffee, milk, breakfast. Even coffee and tea interferes with thyroxine absorption. So it's only with water. Many drugs, including calcium and iron, interfere with absorption. So if a patient is also on coexisting calcium and iron supplementation, either it's after lunch or dinner, don't combine. Of course, things like H2 receptor blockers, proton pump inhibitors, they don't interfere with absorption. Thyroxine T4 synthetically we use is got a very long half-life, up to 7 days. So you could even give the patient thyroxine therapy dose with poor compliance and so for any reason if you feel once a week. The whole weekly dose could be calculated and given because it got such a long half-life. And if you see the average adult dose requirement in autoimmune thyroiditis, it may be around 1.6 microgram kilogram per day. Central autoimmune is a primary hyperthyroid thing. Central is where the hypothalamus pituitary axis is involved. You require a higher dose of approximately 1.9 microgram per kilogram per day. Those who do not have a thyroid, either surgical removal or ablation, or in congenital hypothyroidism where you can have a thyroid where thyroid gland has not developed, they require a much higher dose. These are all just guidelines. And in the individual patient, you have to accordingly select. Timing of dosing may affect free T4 levels. What has been shown is, number one, after thyroxine is taken, probably for 1 to 2 hours, there may be a transient increase in free T4 levels. But after that, it stabilizes. So that's one of the reasons very many times it's suggested, if possible, get the thyroid workup done on an empty stomach before taking the tablet. But it's not always must because like I told you, this is very transient. It's just about 10 to 20% increase, settles down after a few hours. For all practical purpose, the thyroid levels remain constant throughout the day. So even if you assess during a random sample during the rest of the day, you will get the correct picture of thyroid status. In initial dose in the young, you may start at a full dose. Like I told you, those people who are elderly, people with cardiac ailment, you always start at a lower dose and thing. Recovery starts in about 2 weeks. That is symptom wise. Full dose was a step up. Like I told you, more or less starting with a full dose going up, clinical improvement is more or less same, but lab improves much better with a full dose and earlier. If compliance is a problem, you could even give a weekly dose, but avoid this in the elderly. Elderly, actually, you have to be careful so that you do not precipitate congestive cardiac failure, angina, cardiovascular problem. And in postmenopausal women, osteoporosis is a serious problem. So you should always be careful that you do not overdo it. In other words, over replace or overdose the patient. Postpartum thyroiditis, like I told you, is a transient hyperthyroid state initially, hypothyroid later on, and this occurs, like I told you, initially because what happens is during pregnancy, HCG is an immunosuppressive agent. In autoimmune thyroiditis, what happens is because of high levels of HCG in pregnancy, you suppress the immunity, and postpartum there is a release and it flares up. Like the chairperson said, a whole lot of autoimmune problems can be associated with autoimmune thyroiditis. Type 1 diabetes is one. Addison's disease is another. Hypoparathyroidism can occur. You can have celiac disease, myasthenia gravis, rheumatoid, pernicious anemia. So once you have made out an autoimmune thyroiditis, it is mandatory on your part to look for other autoimmune diseases. And it's not that all this, arise at the same time or express themselves at the same time. It could evolve at any time. If you have positive thyroid antibodies during pregnancy and later on the patient develops hyper or hyper, then it indicates it's a postpartum thyroiditis. And like I told you, it is probably among the few conditions of hypothyroidism where replacement or therapy is transient, and probably you could stop therapy, say, in a year's time. So this is, in short, a few discussions or a thing which I wanted to tell you regarding autoimmune thyroiditis. Now it's for you now to take on from here. What comments? I'm sure all of you would have lot of experience with this. What do you think are the areas which we should discuss? And I'd be very happy to get your opinion on this, because I'm sure all of you would have been seeing, and every case is different. You know, every thyroid, just like in clinical medicine, every case. So also in every case is totally different.
Sometimes we request for free T3 and T4. What is the indication for asking for?
Yeah, now I'll answer that question because we'll have a case on pregnancy and hypothyroidism. I'll remember to answer that during that case. I think after the third case we'll do the pregnancy. There I will discuss about doing the free T3, free T3 and free T4 levels.
Is there any effect of any anti-diabetic treatment on thyroid function? Because I read in one article that sulfonylurea, chronic sulfonylurea therapy may produce a kind of hypothyroid state, or metformin may interfere with thyroid.
Now in one of the cases I'll show you the interaction of drugs. There is a whole list of drugs which could interfere with thyroid functions. So in one of the cases I'll show you the whole list. You have got anti-epileptic, you've got antidepressants, you have a whole lot of agents which could interfere with thyroid functions.
Sir,
hello Mohan.
Sir, there is any role of steroid?
Role of steroids in treating autoimmunity?
Yes, sir.
No, there is no role of steroids in treating autoimmunity. So also there is no role for any immunosuppressive agent. And the antibody positivity only indicates that there is an autoimmune etiology. So after the first time you have done the antibodies, you need not keep on repeating the antibody titer. It does not mean that, as the antibody titer is increasing, the disease is thinking. So you have no control over it. So you do not attempt to treat. It's not possible either by steroids or an immunosuppressive agent. And once you have done the antibody is positive and it is an autoimmune disease, leave it at this. You need not keep repeating the antibodies every time you do the thyroid function test, because the titer can vary, it can go up and down. It's not going to give you any indication of anything because you are not going to do anything to correct it.
On dose titration, how many times you have to test within a year at T3 to 4 days?
It depends on the patient. So keep, initially till he stabilizes. You may probably have to see him once in every 2 months or so. Once they are stable, if you see them once in 6 months to 12 months, fine enough. So it all depends on the patient. Initially, till they stabilize, you have to see them more often. Once they have stabilized, once in 6 months or once a year is more than enough.
And replacement after thyroid carcinoma, they have done surgery, and how will you proceed on?
Yeah, replacement, like I said, that is a suppression. Here what we are doing is replacement. So that's why I said you could be less aggressive here. Keep the TSH between 0.5 to 2. But if you are doing it as a replacement for thyroid cancer, it is suppressive. You want to totally suppress. So you'll have to get the TSH below 0.1 or close to 0.1. The lower limit is 0.3. So keep it around 0.1 to 0.2. as much as he can tolerate without symptoms, because any amount of TSH could proliferate or stimulate remaining thyroid tissue. So that's a suppression dose below 0.3, that's around 0.1 or 2. Replacement around 0.5 to 2 you could keep.
Sir, if the TSH is between 4 and 10 and the patient is asymptomatic but antibodies are positive.
Yeah, I'll come to case. That's subclinical hypothyroidism. We have a case on that. So I'll do that.
So chronic lifelong replacement therapy will affect the bone density. How much?
Yes, there is always that risk. So it's a question of, using the correct dosage, and again, you don't overcorrect. That risk is always there. Thyroxine acts on the bone. So always calcium and vitamin D supplementation will be helpful. And depending on the appropriate time, you should also get a bone densitometer. So that risk is always there. And because it's very, very difficult for you to decide on which is the appropriate therapy. So at times you may overcorrect. So that risk is always there. Especially in the elderly, you have to be very careful, because it's not only osteoporosis which is a problem. Cardiac failure, angina, arrhythmias also can occur. So bone densitometer is a watch you should always have.
The treatment with T3, what conditions will the treatment with T3 be?
Yeah, I'll also come to that in the case which we will do that. So please remember all this which I have not answered. When the time comes, I'll do that. Yeah.
Sir, can we consider stopping or tapering the dose of thyroxine once the patient is stabilized for 1 year on the current dosage of thyronome?
Yeah, it's basically a question of requirement. Like I told you, postpartum thyroiditis is a condition where transient 1 year, you may probably taper off, reduce or so. But in most of them, it's a progressive thing. So either it remains stable or the distraction progresses. So chances of your reducing is very limited, because at times, for some reason or so, you may have stepped up the dosage a little more, 25 micrograms or so, and then you'll bring down. But it's not possible for someone, who's got, say, about who's on replacement of 150 for you to reduce it and bring it. Because it's a progressive destruction of the gland, and it's not going to recover. So it's not a transient hypothyroidism, it's a permanent hypothyroidism. So little change in dosage this way, that way may happen, but it's unlikely that you can reduce and stop. The only condition it will occur is keep your initial diagnosis of hypothyroidism itself was doubtful, whether patient was started correctly on thyroxine or it was doubtful. At times you may not even have a lab value. In those cases, what you have to do is stop thyroxine at least for 3 weeks, because like I told you, it's got a very long half-life. You have to stop thyroxine at least for 3 weeks, preferably 4 weeks. After that, repeat it, because that will give you an idea of the endogenous secretion, because all the thyroxine exogenously given would have gone up from the circulation by then.
Sir, in neonatal and hypothyroidism in children, the thyroxine is needed for brain and bone growth. But if it is necessary for bone growth in children, how it is acts in the elderly osteoporosis? Action is different for extreme ages.
See, thyroxine is a metabolically active hormone. It is involved in protein synthesis. So definitely it is important in protein synthesis and growth. It definitely helps. So in children, it is not only physical growth, but mental development also it's involved. Thyroxine acts on the bone. Now again, even if you have protein synthesis, what happens is it has got osteoclastic activity. So what happens, it stimulates the osteoclast. And in osteoporosis is more of osteoclast over osteoblastic activity. So it's not all patients who are on replacement who have this problem. Only if you overcorrect or you give them a much higher dosage than required, this danger is there. So in most cases with replacement, as such, this problem will not come, because you are only replacing what the body physiologically requires. So it's only overcorrection. Just like hyperthyroidism. See, many times when we are replacing thyroxine, we could produce a mild form of iatrogenic hyperthyroidism. by excess dosage. That's where the problem comes. In children, for both physical and mental development, because it is required for protein synthesis. That's why it helps in growth. Here, it acts on the bones and especially increases the osteoclastic activity, especially in postmenopausal women.
Sir, a patient with autoimmune thyroiditis and TSH of more than 150, and patient is getting a dose around some 200 mics. Still, TSH is not coming down for 3 to 6 months. What to do for that, sir?
Yeah, I'll also do that case where, where poor absorption interaction is there. So I'll remember to answer it to that.
Hello. So very high elevations of anti-TPO, that antibodies also interact with the TSH. So the TSH sometimes shows false positive elevation to a very high titer.
Again, it's more an assay problem. It is because of an interaction. Or you may rarely have a situation of TSH resistance, where though the T4 and free T4 and T3 are normal, there is still resistance. So TSH may be high. What you say is more an assay problem. It's more an assay problem. There may be an interaction during the assay where you are a thing. Otherwise, for all practical purpose with the present assays which we have, TSH is very sensitive. So either estimation of the thyroid antibodies or the thyroid antibodies do not interfere with the assays. Those problems we are having on previously. Right now with this assay, they are very specific, very sensitive. So this antibody titer does not interfere with the assays. They are very specific and sensitive, the assays which we have now. That problem and all we were having previously. So keep you giving a very high dose, thyroid levels come to normal, TSH still remains high, then there's some form of TSH resistance either at the pituitary or hypothalamus.
So nowadays, serum TSH at the birth is screened for neonatal hypothyroidism. Some say the cord blood TSH along with the maternal blood, it is interface, so it is recommended for after 3 days. Some said cord blood TSH can be done in the first day itself. What is your opinion, sir?
See, what happened physiologically at the time of birth, TSH shoots up in the first few hours to 70 and above and comes back to normal within 3 days. Simultaneously with TSH going up, T3 and T4 also secretion increases, and that takes about 2 to 3 weeks to settle down. So what you have to do as far as TSH is concerned, because the basic diagnosis, cord blood you can take, because it's only in the first few hours, 4 to 6 hours, where it shoots up. From the cord blood it is still not shot up. You will get a true index. Otherwise you have to do it after 3rd day, because by which time the 4 to 6 hours shooting up in TSH which occurs, it normalizes and comes to normal. So cord blood or 3rd day, not in between, because in between you are lost. TSH settles down by the 3rd day. T3 and T4 will take at least about 2 to 4 weeks to settle down. So cord blood plus or 3rd day, or you can do both. 1st and 2nd day avoid, because you are caught in between the TSH surge. See, as far as thyroxine is concerned, in the first trimester, what happens, the fetus is totally dependent on the mother for thyroxine. From the 2nd trimester onwards, the fetal thyroid itself starts producing thyroxine. And among the few things which do not cross the placenta is T4. Thyroid antibodies cross the placenta, TRH causes antibodies cross. T4 and TSH do not cross. So it's unlikely that this would have affected. That is why the cord blood will give you a typical index of the endogenous production by the fetus. I think we'll go on to the next case. Oh, we've taken up quite a lot of time here. Again, estrogen increases concentration of TBG. So therapy with OCP increases the T3 and T4 concentration. The question you asked me, what happens is thyroxine is bound to either thyroxine binding globulin, prealbumin and albumin. So any woman who's on estrogen therapy, you will have a total level of T4 being much elevated. That's an indication for doing free T4. So also in pregnancy, what happens is with the estrogen going up, the total thyroid hormones, total T4, will be 1.5 times the normal. It will be 1.5 times the normal. So either you have this cutoff of 1.5 or you use free T4 in that situation. And during pregnancy, binding protein increases, and this increases total T4 requirement also, because the free available, which is the biologically available free T4 level, is low, because most of it is bound to the increased production of TBG. This has been demonstrated in patients who receive OCP. So two definite indication where you require a free T4 and not a total T4 would be women on oral contraceptives, or there are few other drugs which can increase the binding proteins. So also androgen decrease the binding proteins. So in situation like that, you can go for a free T4 pregnancy, or mandatory you can do free T4. The only problem is the most sensitive method of doing a free T4 is with the equilibrium dialysis method, and the direct measurements assays which we all use still have some problems. So that also you should keep in mind. So it's not a foolproof assay. A 20-year-old female present for evaluation of abnormal thyroid functions, hypothyroid since age 10 years and on therapy since then. Family history: mother had Graves' disease, brother hypothyroidism, thyroidectomy for multinodular goiter, HPE, had a papillary CA, restarted thyroxine post-op, did not receive radioiodine therapy. Despite 300 micrograms of thyroxine, patient's TSH remain elevated between 20 and 200, the question which you asked me. You have to first confirm compliance, whether the patient is properly taking it correctly, taking the drug every day, and there is no interference with other drugs which they may be taking along with it. Taken on an empty stomach. Make sure no calcium and iron products intake along with it, because both of them will interfere with absorption. No symptoms of malabsorption. No undissolved pills in stools. This also, if you still have, make sure that stool is examined and the pills may be coming out undissolved itself. And weight gain and fatigue persist in this patient. Now you see the TSH continues to be 200, T4 low, then later on again at 100, total T3 is normal, free T4 is low. Patients with autoimmune thyroiditis are at risk of developing another autoimmune condition. Like I said, you should look at a whole lot of other conditions. Case reports on LT4 developing celiac disease associated malabsorption to T4. Celiac disease is a very common occurrence which can occur in those with autoimmune thyroiditis, and this could cause malabsorption. So it's very, very important that you keep this also in mind. Institution of gluten-free diet resolves malabsorption over time. Always consider medication non-complaints first. Before you think of any resistance or any cause, make sure complaints taking the drug is there. There's no interference or malabsorption. Complaints improves by making patient take full LT4 days at one time while being observed. Another way you can do is make sure that you sit down with the patient, make sure he takes it. You can even draw a blood sample, say 8 hours or 10 hours later, and check up. So very many times for psychological reason or so, patients may be not telling you the truth, may be cheating themselves, cheating you. So most important is compliance and malabsorption. Before you think of uncommon conditions, if you do not have the required effect and benefit with thyroxine therapy. Again, in those people with complaints, weekly dose can be done. You calculate the dose per week and give it. But that's not for the elderly patient because you always have a problem of angina, congestive cardiac failure, and arrhythmias. Again, like I said, altered thyroxine replacement, poor complaints, reduced thyroxine absorption, coexisting disease, malabsorption, celiac disease, conditions associated with reduced absorption, gastric acid production. H. pylori infection is another very common cause for decreased absorption. Drugs like iron, calcium carbonate, sucralate, cholestyramine, foodstuffs, soya. Soya is another thing which can interfere with absorption. So someone has to take soya. It can be after lunch or dinner. Increased thyroxine clearance can occur in pregnancy. Drugs, like you are asking a whole lot of drugs, carbimazepine, phenytoin, phenobarbital, rifampicin, whole lot of them. There are a lot of drugs which have not even been studied. So it's always better that you separate thyroxine therapy from any drug. Even if that drug has to be taken on an empty stomach, give at least about half an hour between thyroxine and the other drug. Because these are all very many common drugs studied, but there is a whole lot of other drugs which may be interfering, which we don't know. Again, binding proteins, like I told you, so the total hormone goes up, but the free hormone remains low. And here you have a whole list you got which all interferes. You got glucocorticoids, dopamine, octreotide, rifampicin, phenytoin, carbamazepine, carbimazole, beta blockers, glucocorticoids, amiodarone, propylthiouracil, estrogens, glucocorticoids, a whole lot of drug, interleukin, amiodarone, whole lot of them which can interfere. And this list is never ending. Many of these are, established drugs like OHAs which you are mentioning. Yes, it's possible some interference may be there. Two sisters, one hypothyroid and one hyperthyroid, medicines, glipizide, sildenafil, metformin. Past history, nothing specific. Labs, hemoglobin A1C 14.5, later around 9.8, testosterone normal, TSH 10.29, free T4 normal, anti-thyroid antibody strongly positive, lipids show high LDL and low HDL. This is typical subclinical hypothyroidism, which is a mild form of hypothyroidism, where what happens is T4 total or free T4 remains normal, TSH goes up. So what do you do in such patients? Now, as I told you, the upper cutoff for TSH is 4.5. Now, if you take overt hypothyroidism, TSH will be about 10. So between 4.5 to 10 is what you see in most of these patients. You reassess reassess TSH measurements with FT4 measurements 2 to 12 weeks after the initial lab, if your initial TSH is above 4.5. And if serum TSH level is within reference range, yes, no problem, wait, monitor, repeat TSH after 6 to 12 months. Now keep it is not within this range, you have serum TSH level between 4.5 to 10, then look for free T4. Now if free T4 is also low, then you can treat the patient. Now if you have someone who's got free T4, normal TSH high, if pregnancy is something which she is planning, or you feel that she may be becoming pregnant in the time, please treat it, because subclinical hypothyroidism is associated with very poor pregnancy outcome. So if at all there is one very definite indication for treatment of hypothyroidism, subclinical hypothyroidism with thyroxine, it's pregnancy. Then again you wait, no signs of symptoms, fine. If signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism persist, then you can put the patient on thyroxine. Now if serum TSH is about 10, look for FT4, level decreased, no problem, start treatment. Again, if it's normal, T4 is normal TSH, you have a choice. if you feel the patient has got symptoms of hypothyroidism, you can definitely put the patient on therapy, thyroxine replacement. If she is planning pregnancy, or you think she'll become pregnant in the time to come, you could definitely start, because subclinical hypothyroidism is associated with poor pregnancy outcome. Prevalence is in 4 to 10% of the general population, up to 15 to 20% in women above 60 years. Anti-thyroid positive in 80% of patients. And in 80% of patients, subclinical hypothyroidism, TSH is more than 10. And conversion to overt hypothyroidism is much high if both TSH is elevated and antibodies are positive. If only TSH is elevated and antibodies are negative, it's less, 3%. If only anti-thyroid antibodies are positive, then it's only 2%. Now, is there a necessity to treat subclinical hypothyroidism? Definitely treat if you have TSH above 10. If there's a goiter, patient has got symptoms of hypothyroidism, antibodies are positive, dyslipidemia. If TSH is below 10, indication depends on etiology and risk factors. Concomitant CAD, dyslipidemia, depression, infertility. These are all conditions where they've shown benefit of treating or correcting subclinical hypothyroidism. Overt hypothyroidism, as you know, is a major cardiovascular risk factor. Subclinical plus minus. Dyslipidemia, yes, you treat. Depression, infertility. So if you have TSH below 10 associated with one of these, treat. If TSH is between 3 to 5, increased risk of progression to hypothyroidism may be there. So there is no necessity for you to start therapy. You could follow up periodically. If the antibodies are positive, then there is a higher chance of conversion of subclinical to overt. In view of decreased IQ in children of women who had subclinical hypothyroidism during pregnancy and adverse effects on pregnancy outcome, thyroxine advised for pregnant women and women anticipating pregnancy. Because as such, overt hypothyroidism is an anovulatory condition. So chances of a woman who's overtly hypothyroid become pregnant is less unless she is corrected. Subclinical, of course, she can become pregnant. And in this case, it's very, very important for you to start thyroxine at 50 to 70% of the predicted full replacement dose. Now, like I told you, if you have classical primary hypothyroidism, the dosage I told you. Women, the full dose anywhere from 75 to 125. Men anywhere from 125 to 200. Subclinical, it is probably about 50 to 75% of them. Now, as far as evidence for subclinical hypothyroidism to treat or not is still a $1 million question. Like I told you, there are certain indications which I pointed out in there. Otherwise, cardiovascular risk in overt hypothyroidism is high. Subclinical plus minus. So, whether to treat. So, in those condition and indication I mentioned, yes, subclinical hypothyroidism has to be treated. Rest, choice is yours. Yes. How many minutes? Okay, yeah. There are nearly about 10 cases, but I'm sorry, I think probably we'll continue on with it during your next meeting. Yes, thing. So, they just 2 minutes I'll just take. What I will do is, I'll just show you these 3 scenarios. 23-year-old female, 12 weeks amenorrhea, positive pregnancy test, routine antenatal visit, free T4 is normal, TSH is grossly suppressed, 0.1. What would be your diagnosis? Just 2 minutes, I'll finish. Now, the next case, 30-year-old Kalavati, tiredness, difficulty in concentrating, decreased frequency of bowel movements and increased tendency to gain weight. She comes to you to discuss her plans for starting a family sometime in the next 3 months. Her lab showed T4 normal, T3 normal, TSH. Antibodies are positive. Labs normal, antibodies positive. Next case, long-standing hypothyroidism and thyroxine comes to you with positive urine test for pregnancy, anemia on iron and calcium supplementation. She asks if there will be any problem related to a current treatment with L-thyroxine. Now in her case, free T4 is on the lower side of normal, TSH is 10, hemoglobin is 10. So again, if you see, just one slide, what happens is during pregnancy, the HCG increase especially very drastically in the first trimester. So because of that, what happens is thyroxine binding globulin increases and there is more binding of total T4. In other words, more binding of thyroxine. So the free level comes down. So if you see, the free level of thyroid hormone comes down, TSH comes down. So in first trimester, what happens? Because of increased HCG, and you know HCG is got a structure very similar to TSH. So what it does is, it acts on the TSH receptor and increases thyroxine production. So to counterbalance the increased binding. So that's why though you have a total T4 being high, free T4 also goes up. But as you can see, TSH is grossly low. So what happens is, in the first trimester, TSH of 0.1 is not subclinical hypothyroidism, is a normal physiological change. Second case where we saw the thyroid functions were normal, antibodies were positive, there is no indication to put the patient on thyroxine replacement. On the other hand, you could wait and watch. If it progresses on to subclinical or overt hypothyroidism, you can treat. Third patient was a classical subclinical hypothyroidism, and as I told you that subclinical hypothyroidism has got very poor pregnancy outcome. In those cases, among the causes of subclinical, one indication for therapy is chance of pregnancy or a woman being pregnant. And in women in pregnancy, the TSH level which you should maintain is 2.5. So TSH in other conditions, the upper limit is 4, fine. As far as pregnancy is concerned, you should maintain TSH 2.5. So if you are making a diagnosis of hypothyroidism subclinical, in pregnancy it is 2.5, not above 4 like in non-pregnant women. And if you are going to treat, you should also make sure you bring down the TSH below 2.5 in pregnant women. Thank you.
And you showed that pregnancy and thyroid antibodies are positive, no, sir? In that scenario, what are you going to do, sir? Pregnancy with thyroid antibodies were positive.
Yeah.
With all T3, T4, TSH was normal.
Sorry, we have not had time to do all this. Thyroid antibody, sorry, it switched off. Sorry. Thyroid antibodies are present in 60% women in the reproductive age group. Women with thyroid autoimmunity who are euthyroid in the early stages of pregnancy should be selectively monitored for elevation of TSH above normal range. And again, as long as they are euthyroid, they don't have subclinical hypothyroidism, no replacement is required. Only thing with positive antibodies, there's a risk of either going into subclinical hypothyroidism or overt. You monitor. So in other words, TSH of 0.1 or very low levels, it's a normal physiological change which you do not treat. Same thing, thyroid antibodies are positive in 60% of women who are pregnant. There also you do not treat if the thyroid functions are normal. Only thing, if you have subclinical hypothyroidism, you have to treat. And only thing is, those with antibodies positive, there is a chance of they're going into subclinical hypothyroidism. Most important, like I told you, postpartum thyroiditis is very common in those women. So in the postpartum period, because of HCG, you have an immunosuppression in pregnancy, there is a release phenomenon. So what happens is they may go into postpartum thyroiditis, transient hyperthyroidism, later they may become hypothyroid. So you'll have to watch out for them. Only you have to monitor. You don't treat the antibodies, no thyroxine replacement is required.
It was an excellent presentation. In a short time, I think he has covered so much in hypothyroid, but still there is a lot to talk about hypothyroid, I think so. We give a very good applause. And I think we started half an hour late, and already we are 30 minutes behind the schedule.